Hey everyone, welcome back to Inbound Marketing University. This is day number 5, and unfortunately the last day of classes, I know, but I do want to say the review session is on for next Monday, so feel free to attend that. Don't worry, this isn't the total end yet, so that's something to look forward to. Also, all the information on the certification exam is up on the inboundmarketing.com/university website, so feel free to check that out. Get ready and see how you can prep for the exam. There's all sorts of information and resources for you there. So now we are on to class number 9. This is Successful Email Marketing, or Convert 301, with Eric Groves of Constant Contact. He's the Senior VP there. He's been with the company since 2001. He's been helping the company grow to 280,000 customers. Their customers are nonprofits, small businesses, and Eric is also publishing a book in the summer, so you should check that out as well. For those who want to ask questions during the presentation, a couple ways you can do that. You can ask questions in the box to the left of the slides. If you are on Twitter, you can use the hashtag IMU, or you can go to the inboundmarketing.com forums, inboundmarketing.com/FORUM, and we will check those out as well. So with no further ado, Eric, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. It's wonderful to be here this morning, and I'm looking forward to chatting with all of you about creating successful email marketing campaigns. I thought I'd first off start with a little bit of an introduction about what email marketing really is all about. And it's pretty simple, actually. What it's all about is delivering professional email communications to an interested audience containing information that they find valuable. Pretty simple, right? Well, and the other alternative is to send something that is really unsuccessful, and that would be something that people would define as being unsolicited email or spam. And, you know, the easiest way to think about this is that the recipient is the one who gets to determine what is wanted and unwanted. So what you're really trying to do is deliver a message that contains information that they really look forward to receiving. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's get started. Why email marketing? Why do it? Well, first of all, you know, there are a lot of different medias out there that you could certainly use to communicate with your customers. But email marketing is one of those that is accepted by others as a form where they're willing to accept commercial communication. And in addition to that, it's pretty much ubiquitous in terms of the number of people that have an email address. So those two things combined make it very appealing. When you think about it from an economic standpoint, it's also highly cost-effective. Email marketing costs a fraction of a penny per communication to send. And when you compare that against the alternative that most people think about, direct mail, the comparison it goes along these lines. If you were to print, stamp, and send a communication via direct mail, you're talking about something that's north of $1 or $1.50 to send that communication out. So people tended to not communicate as often as they should because that cost was overwhelming. Well, along came email marketing, and now you can maintain contact with your customers for a fraction of a penny. The next question is really how to go about doing it. And I apologize for this because this slide I thought would be in transition mode, and it's not. But behind this was actually an image of how people typically get started doing email marketing. And the way that happens is they typically start off using their email client, whether it's Outlook or Gmail. They upload a bunch of their customers' email addresses in there, and they blast out a message to them. And when they do that, sometimes they put all the email addresses in the BCC line, hopefully, but sometimes they put them in the to line, where now all of a sudden your entire customer database goes out the door. But it also doesn't do as much as one could to really get your branding across to the recipient. So sending professional email campaigns is all about taking and grabbing your brand and your essence and delivering it along with a very powerful message to an audience. And this is the one self-serving slide that I'll point to. Why use an email service provider? Well, someone like Constant Contact takes care of all of that for you. So you can basically just type in your content and we'll format it and make it look beautiful and make it easy to send out. So let's talk a little bit about how you go about doing successful email. It's really a three-step process about how you make connections at the outset of a relationship so that you collect the information you need to carry on a communication. It's about how you inform the audience, and then finally how you can use that information process to grow your business, both by getting repeat sales and getting your existing customers to forward your communications on to others. So let's get started. The first step along the way is to build your email list. And here, the one point that I want you to walk away with is that email lists are all about building quality over quantity. Right? You want to collect names of people that really want to receive your information. So where are the places that you can do that? And there are quite a few. If you've got a website, you should have a little sign-up form on there that says join our mailing list and potentially a link to your archive where you can see all your past campaigns. And that's something that Constant Contact can help you with. We've got a little tool that does that. If you've got a point of sale where people come in and out of a storefront, you should have a sign-up book out there. Just a little 3.5 by 5 card that says join our preferred customer mailing list. Your first name, last name, and email address. You'd be amazed. Almost 60% of customers that are asked for their email address by a store owner of someone they know and trust will give that email address to them. So if you don't ask, that asset's walking right out the door. You can also put your sign-up form on your email signature that you use in your emails you send out. And then another place I'd like to point out is that when you receive an inbound call, it's a great opportunity. And it reminds me of a story when I was actually doing a seminar for the Small Business Development Centers, and I asked them, where do your customers come from? And interestingly, they went through the list of all the different places they came from, and they said, the number one place we get customers from is from banks. I said, really? Well, how does that work? Well, someone comes into a bank and says, I want to borrow money to start a business, and the bank says, well, let me see your business plan. And the person says, I really don't have one. And they say, well, you know what? You need to go to the Small Business Development Center or SCORE and have them help you create a business strategy. And so I said, oh, that's great. So how do they contact you? Well, they pick up the phone and they call us and they ask us, when's your next training session? And I said, well, what does the person do on the phone? And, well, they just tell them, next Thursday we've got a business planning seminar. And I said, and then? And they said, well, then we just hang up and assume they come. And I said, well, what do you send in your email newsletter? Oh, it's a listing of all of the trainings that we do. And I said, well, isn't that an opportunity that you should be saying to that person, oh, we have one coming this Thursday, but if you'd like to join our mailing list, we'll send you a listing of all the programs we provide. And all of a sudden the light bulb went on and they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're not doing that. So you really have to ask yourself, where are all of the touch points that you have with your customers, and how can you use that touch point to collect their information? There's one other place I wanted to point out, and this could be fraught with peril a little bit, and that's trade shows and networking events. Now, trade shows and networking events are a great place to make connections and build a list, but it's not always quality. It can sometimes be quantity, especially on that last day of the trade show, when everybody's coming by your booth just to check out what swag you have so they can bring home something for the kids. Well, that's a time when you need to be really careful about how you build your list. And our CEO, Gail Goodman, loves to say you have two pockets for a reason. In your slacks, when someone comes up and just wants your swag, take their business card and put it in one pocket. And when someone comes up and actually engages you in a dialogue, well, take that business card and put it in another pocket. Because those are the people you're going to want to follow up with, and those are the people you're going to want to add to your list, while the other pocket is most likely best served by just taking those cards and tossing them in the trash, because you want to make sure that the people that receive your communications are really interested in what you're all about. So let's talk a little bit about how you build your list, because relevancy in communication has really been coming to the forefront. And when you, on your website sign-up form, you have the ability to ask additional information about that person. You can certainly ask their first name, last name, and mailing address and things like that. But more importantly, you can ask them what they're interested in. So say I'm a travel agency, like this case of Sunset Travel. I might want to ask the people signing up whether they're interested in singles destinations or family destinations, because I promote both. And by doing so, I can make sure that when I have an offer that's a family destination offer, the audience that's receiving that is specifically the audience that wants to receive that. And why that's important is that, say I signed up for the family destinations, but the first 4 or 5 communications I got were all about singles destinations. Well, when the 5th one comes that's a family destination, you have already trained me that it's not important to me what you're sending because it's not in line with my interests. So I'm more likely just to pass by that email and not get to the heart of the matter of what you're trying to send me. So you can use these interest categories to really channel your messages to exactly who is looking forward to reading them. So that's a bunch of information about building your list, and I wanted to just leave you with a checklist, and I'm going to do that at the end of each section. So as you're building your list, the things that you want to ask yourself is, are you collecting contact information from every touch point you have with a prospect or customer? Are you setting your employees up for success in doing that? Some people I've talked to have actually run contests with their employees to see who can collect the most sign-ups at a point of sale. And it's a great way to make sure everybody's tuned into building that list. Another good friend of mine has a men's clothing store in New York called Rothman's Clothing Store, and we actually worked with him to not only put out a sign-up form, but to put right behind that sign-up form a laminate frame with a copy of one of his great campaigns behind it. And what you do there by setting that up is that you set the person's expectations for what they're going to receive. So as they're signing up, they're saying, oh, okay, that's great. Yeah, I look forward to receiving that. And you're more likely to get that message opened if you set that expectation. And you can also do that online by creating an archive. It's also important to make sure that you're asking for permission and telling people what they're going to receive, and also setting their expectations from the standpoint of frequency. You know, are you going to be sending a monthly newsletter, a weekly communication, or a daily communication? And, you know, especially if you're trying to do something very frequent, you want to make sure that that person who's signing up for the list knows that they're signing up for something that's going to be coming that frequent to them. So let's move on now to the second section of my presentation today. It's all about creating valuable email content. This is often something that people struggle with because they don't think they have a lot of great content ideas. And we're going to give you some tips along the way that might help that. But to start off, what I wanted you to think about is nirvana in email is when somebody goes to the point of creating a folder within their inbox just for your communications. Right? That means that they're seeing so much value from the things that you're sending that they want to save them. The other thing to think about is, would somebody receiving this communication want to be talking about this with their friends on Friday night? And you know, that's one of the things where it's really important to add a forward to a friend email in your email newsletter so you can encourage that behavior to happen. It's something that's, you know, fairly unique to email when you consider it compared to direct mail, because, you know, how often do you take a piece of direct mail that you received, fold it up, put it back in an envelope, and forward it on to a friend and say, hey, I thought you were interested in this. But when it comes to email marketing, that's just the way that we all communicate. That forward button is sitting right there in Outlook, and it's something you can embed right in your communication. But that's what you're trying to accomplish. So let's start thinking about how we create content. And one of the first things that you need to think about are, what are your objectives? What do you want to have happen when that email hits the inbox? Are you trying to promote your product or your business? Are you just trying to inform your customers about the industry in which you work? Are you trying to increase loyalty? And the reason it's important to try and figure out your objectives up front is, one, it'll help you figure out what information you want to collect so I can make sure that I'm targeting you correctly. But also, it'll help you figure out how you're going to measure success. Are you going to measure success of your communications based on the number of people that click through and buy from you, or by the way that people interact with you when you sit down to talk to them as a personal consultant? Those two are very different extremes, and you, based on the way what you want to have happen, you can formulate your content in a delivery vehicle to maximize your impact. So let's talk for a moment about the different types of formats there are out there. There are 3 different buckets that they typically fall into: newsletters, promotions, and announcements. And I'm not talking about the actual layout here. We have over 400 different templates that you can use of all different varieties of these types of communications. What I'm really talking about is the content that goes inside it, because you could certainly use a promotional content to send a monthly newsletter or vice versa. A newsletter is typically used to communicate some form of educational content. And that means that what you find in a newsletter is typically a fair amount of text, a small amount of images used to sort of give some breakage to the text and let the eyes rest a little bit. And the calls to action contained in a newsletter are typically fairly soft. And by that I mean they're sort of read more, learn more about this topic. And they're meant to direct you off to a place on a website where there's a lot more information that this person can leverage about that topic. The frequency of a newsletter is typically monthly or quarterly. And the formats typically will have a table of contents. And one thing I wanted to point out about newsletters is just because you can doesn't mean you should. Newsletters can contain unlimited numbers of articles. But what you're really trying to accomplish when you send an email communication is to flick somebody on the forehead and say, hey, remember me, remember what I do, here's a little nugget of knowledge to make you a better customer of mine. And that doesn't require you to send 14 articles of communication. In fact, if you have 14 articles worth of communication, you've got 14 great newsletters. And there's nothing worse than an email newsletter that's supposed to be monthly that only comes out once because you're so exhausted after sending it that you never want to do this again. So, just because you can put a lot of articles into a newsletter doesn't mean you should. Promotional communications are typically sent, on a monthly basis, maybe a little bit more frequently, and they focus more on the promotion than on text. So the quantities of text and image kind of flip in this, where there'll be more images and less text. But again, the same thing applies. You're just trying to flip the person in the forehead and say, hey, remember my store, this is one of the things we sell. And I like to use the example of Gap, right? The only thing that I ever buy from the Gap is khakis. When I get an email from the Gap, I look at my cuffs on my khakis and I say, do I need khakis? Regardless of what they're selling me. They could be promoting sweaters or shirts or whatever, but to me, that just means khakis. So when you're sending a promotional communication, you don't have to put all of your products up in the communication. Just put a couple of them in there. And remember that over 50% of what's purchased through a promotional email is not what's actually contained in the message. So they're coming to your store or your website to buy other things as well. Announcements are typically triggered around a specific event. And the important fact to take away from these is that the frequency is very, very fast, right? So I've got a save the date, early bird registration, register now, 2 seats left, can't wait to see you tomorrow, thanks for attending our event. That's a lot of communication to come out at once. And so it's really important, as we'll talk about in a minute, to have a calendar so that you can set yourself up for success on that. Before we jump into that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about content. Great, a lot of people ask me, how do I get word of mouth? How do I get people to forward my content onto others? And the one bit of advice I give to them is it's not about you. It's about sharing what you know that causes that to happen. And what you're trying to do is educate your audience. People, recipients, everyone on the phone, we like to be educated. We like to be smart. We like other people to help us be smart. And when you do that in a communication, you set yourself up for success. So how can you create some great content ideas? Well, what I suggest to everybody is that they take one of those manila folders and they write content ideas on it and they stick it on their desk. Because great content ideas don't come to you at 11 o'clock at night when you're trying to create your email campaign for the next morning. They come to you when you're talking to your customers. Right? When they ask you an interesting question and you give them an answer to that, that's a point in time that you should write down that question and the answer and stick it in that folder. When you read a great article and it causes you to think about something in your industry, rip that article out of the newspaper or print it out and stick it in that folder. You can use someone else's content in your communications, but it's very important that if you do, you get their permission prior to doing so. And then you can embed that in and say, hey, I read a great article about 529 plans. This is a little bit of summary about the article, and you put in a link in it. You drive them back to that person's website. What you've done for your audience is you've helped them sort through all of the information out there and find information that's really valuable to them. And that's what it's all about. You're trying to, tell people and share your knowledge, because as a small business owner, that's what you've got. That differentiates you, a small store owner from Walmart. Walmart, when someone walks in the door, that's why they have that greeter there. They're trying to make a connection. But as a small business owner, you already have that connection because that's what you're all about, and it's your passion that's got to come through. So it's also important to make sure you use your personality in your communications. Have fun with it. It shouldn't come across like you're writing a book for a textbook. It should come across with your personality and have a lot of fun. So now that we've talked about content, let's talk a little bit about keeping it concise. It's important. We talked a little bit earlier about the number of articles you send, but the articles that you include should be short. And if you think about what the Wall Street Journal has in that center column, where it just sort of gives you a capsule of what the content is that you can read more about, that's what your newsletter should look like. And it should have a link where they can go off and read the full article on your website. And the reason for that is you want to respect the reader's time. You want to say, hey, it's time for my monthly newsletter. Here's what I'm talking about this month. And if you're interested, here's a place you can go to read on. It respects that reader who's looking at it on their computer screen, and it also gives you great feedback that we'll talk about later. By people who click on that link and read on, you can see exactly who does that. So keep it short and sweet. And you can use bullets and things like that to actually shorten your content quite a bit. The other thing about email is that you have this ability to include a call to action, a click-through link. And there's lots of different things that you can use a link for. And it's important to recognize that also 85% of the response to an email communication happens in the first 48 hours. So it's important that your clicks and your calls to action have a sense of urgency about them. And it also tells you a little bit about when you should be sending communications, because if I'm going to have a sale this weekend at my store, then sending today or yesterday is fine, but if I sent it 2 weeks ago, people would have already forgotten about it. So use the sense of urgency to make your click-throughs come to life. There's a lot of different things that you can use for click-throughs. We talked about the soft ones of read on and learn more, the more powerful ones in promotions that are click here to buy now, and that type of thing. But the other thing that's important to consider when you're doing click-throughs is it's an opportunity to get feedback. Think of email marketing as your opportunity to speak out to your customers. Putting a link in there gives your customers the opportunity to speak back to you. And that's what feedback's all about. So either inserting a link to a survey where they can tell you the things that they're interested in learning more about from you, or even just inserting a link that's a mail-to link that pops their email client and allows them to ask you a question, is a great alternative link that you can put in your communications. So how often should you send a communication? And when should you send it? Well, one thing I'd like you to remember is permission is perishable, so you need to be maintaining contact at least quarterly. From that point, it's really going to depend on how much information you want to send and when you want to send it. And that's the reason why it's important to create a calendar. Now, you don't have to create a whole year's worth of calendar, but at least 3 months' worth of time, and sort of map out when you want to communicate, because if you're having an event and you're sending a monthly newsletter, you want to make sure that you're not over-communicating in any given day or week, and a calendar kind of helps you space those things out. In addition, if you're writing a newsletter and you have a calendar and you know that you wanted to send out a communication today, well, you should be working on your content a week ago, because the worst thing you want to be doing is creating your content at 11 o'clock at night to send out that next morning, because that's where you're going to set yourself up for typos and links that don't work and the like. So a calendar really helps you figure that out. We often get asked, when's the best time to send, and it says on here Tuesday and Wednesday from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Please don't write that down. That's what we used to tell everybody, and guess what? Everybody's sending now Tuesday and Wednesday between 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. The answer to that question is you really want to understand when your readers are interested in getting your communications. The great thing about email is you can actually see when your audience is opening your email. One of our clients actually pointed this out to me when I was presenting. He said, you know, in Constant Contact, there's a time stamp on your open, and that tells you when people are actually opening it. And I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think of that. He said, yeah, I was sending all my communications out at 3 o'clock, and I noticed that everybody was opening them at 8 o'clock. So I changed the sending time to 8 o'clock, and now I got a little bit incremental improvement in my open rate. So the cool thing there is you can test different days and different times to figure out what works best for your audience. So your email content checklist is make sure that you know whether you're trying to promote, inform, or relate. Is it content that your audience is really interested in? Does the branding support your image, and you can customize all the colors to match your brand and your logo and the like? And is your email concise? Does it include a strong call to action? And is it in line with the frequency and timing that you set up as an expectation for your audience? Now let's talk about getting your email read. When an email lands in your inbox, you do two things. You ask yourself, do I know this person, and do I care? Well, there are two lines that you look at in your inbox to figure that out. The first one is the from line, and the from line answers the question, do I know you? So it's really important that that from line stands out as a name that somebody will recognize. So if you have 15 different people in your company, and people know different people, what you might want to do is use your brand of your company in the from line. So, for example, my friend that has the clothing store, not everybody knows that Ken Giddon is the owner of that. So rather than use Ken Giddon at Rothmans NY, he uses Rothmans at rothmansny.com. And by doing so, he gets a chance to put the brand that people recognize right up front. They go, oh yeah, sure, I know those guys. So keeping it consistent and using a brand that someone knows is really important. So let's assume they got past the do I know you. The next question they're going to ask themselves is, do I care? And that's typically where they look at the subject line. So if you put something in there like monthly newsletter, how do you think people are going to react to that? Well, most people will go, oh, I know them, and it's a monthly newsletter. I'll get back to that later. Getting back to it later is sort of the kiss of death in email, because once you've read it, and it changes color from bold to unbolded, you very rarely go back if you're anything like me. And so what I need to do in that subject line is grab your attention and tell you what the value is of opening that email. So let's say you're a CPA, right? Let's pick one of those industries that you think might be really hard to get someone to open a communication. What if my subject line said 2 tips to get an IRS audit? What does that tell you? 2 tips, it's short, to get an IRS audit. Huh. Always wonder what they do to figure that out. Sure, I'll open this up and read it. Or if you're a landscaper, plants, deer won't eat, right? Wow, okay, well, I wonder what that is. So you set your reader up to jump into that content right from that subject line. And it's also, you can have fun with this. The challenge is that it's fairly short. You only have 30 to 40 characters. And some interesting knowledge has been, surveys that have been out there say the shorter the better. But it doesn't mean you can't have fun in there and try and use numbers like 2 tips for IRS audits, type things like that. One of the other things that you should consider doing before you send in order to make sure that your mail actually gets into that inbox is to do a spam check. And we actually have a little tool that's built right into our product. And what this does is it looks at both the subject line and the content, and it says, is there anything spammy in here? What might look spammy? Well, for example, if you were to put a subject line that was all in caps and it had 3 big exclamation points at the end and it said buy, guarantee, it would look very spammy. And so you can use spam checks like this in email service providers like Constant Contact, where it'll just click on it and it'll take all of the known spammy words that are out there right now, and it'll look at your content, look at your subject line, and it'll give you immediate feedback in terms of things that you might want to change in order to maximize the likelihood that you'll end up in the inbox. So before we send our message, we're going to make sure that the images that we've put into our communications are rendering correctly, and that our links are working, and any spam-like content is removed from it. Our from line is going to be something that's consistent and people are going to remember, and that subject line is going to be something that engages people and gives them a little bit of a taste of all the great content they're going to get when they jump into that communication. So next, we're going to talk about what happens when you send that email. Well, sometimes email doesn't get delivered, and it can bounce. And just like direct mail, where it could be returned to sender, there's a similar type thing in email marketing, and it's called bounce management. And what I'm going to do is actually just give you a look at what our UI looks like, but this is just little buckets that we create for emails that bounce back. And I want you to understand exactly why they might bounce back, because that helps you figure out what you should do with those messages. So there's a category called non-existent addresses, and this is a hard bounce. This is the recipient email service provider, the ISP at the other end, the Gmails, the Yahoos, the AOLs, saying this email address doesn't exist anymore. Right? Well, it doesn't make sense to mail to it anymore, but there may be nuggets of gold in there. If your key champion at a business that you sell to has left the business and they've turned off their email address, boy, that's valuable things to know. So you can open up and look at those bounces and say, ooh, Jane has left that company. I better call the company and find out who replaced her. And I also might want to find out where Jane went, because now I've got a champion who might be at another business. So there's nuggets of gold in there. But once you've done all that, and you've looked for, typical misspellings, like someone put AOL.com as ALO.com, and you can certainly fix those. Once you've gone through all of that, you can just remove those, because they're not going to get mailed to and delivered anytime in the future. All of the other buckets are worthwhile keeping in, and those buckets include things like undeliverable, mailbox full, and things like that. And what those really try to gather is, sometimes the Internet is up, sometimes it's down, sometimes mail servers are up, sometimes they're down, and it's just interesting to know that, sometimes mail doesn't get delivered. What you basically do is just sort of scan through and see if you're noticing any patterns in there, but for the most part, you just leave those in your account and try sending later. At Constant Contact, we actually will try and mail 3 times over a 24-hour period if we get an undeliverable, just to make sure that we get it through. And sometimes you'll find that, ones that says undeliverable actually ended up getting queued up in someone's mail server, and when they rebooted their mail server, it actually made it in. So, it's important to just leave those in your email list. When you send a communication, we talk about 2 different triggers that you get to sort of track, and we call them open rates and click-through rates. Open rates, I like to say that those things are more of an art than a science. And the reason for that is that to create an open, what actually happens is email service providers like us put a little 1-by-1 pixel image into an email campaign that's in the HTML side of that. So what does that mean? Well, that means if somebody has their images turned off, that won't register as an open, even if they open it up and read all the content. But if the images aren't turned on, that won't register as an open. Now, also, if they read it on a BlackBerry or another device that is text only, it won't render as an open either, but they still might have read your message. So what does that mean to you? It means that your open rates are really a great way to understand the general direction of what's happening with your email, but it's not an absolute certainty. So what we tell people to do is to look at your open rates and kind of see how it's trending. Is this campaign opening up at a better rate than the one I sent last week? And is it trending up? Is it trending down? Is it trending the same? And your open rates are really determined in many respects by that do I know you, do I care happening. So it could be your subject line caused your open rate to go up or down. You changed the from line for one reason or another. But it's important to look at open rates sort of understanding they're an art and not a science. And also don't look too far back. Because if you think about it, more recently, all of the email clients out there have been coming with the default setting on the email client as images turned off. And it's asking people to take one more step to turn those images on. And as a result of that, open rates have trended down, but that doesn't mean that people are reading your communications less. It just means that your images might not be rendering. Another thing that's really important because of that is to make sure that you don't have a big honking logo or image at the very top of your communication. Because if you think about it, with those images turned off, and most people trying to figure out if they know you and if they care by not only looking at the from and the subject line, but also potentially looking in that preview pane, if you've got a big image or your big logo in there, then what they might see is a big red X, and you don't give them the opportunity to actually see your content. So I actually suggest to people that they tone down the size of their logo maybe, and actually maybe put it down on the left-hand nav bar or right-hand where your table of contents is, and use text at the top to put your name of your business and then the body of your communication, so that that preview window really gives you an opportunity to demonstrate to your audience, well, what's this communication all about? And that will also help you increase your open rates. Let's talk a little bit about click-throughs, because click-throughs are measuring the interest that recipient has in the information you provided, and that can be really valuable to you in trying to figure out what content is of most interest to your audience. Let's pretend you're a dive shop. And you have, 3 different sections in your communication. The first section is about dive gear. The third section is about cool dive sites, and the middle section is about how to calculate, new tables on how to calculate how long you can stay down underwater a certain distance down. And you notice that people are interested in the third article much more so than the first article. Well, that may tell you something about your order, right? Maybe you might want to move your third article up to the top in your next communication and have more information about great dive sites and push the other stuff down, or potentially remove something completely in your next communication because no one was really interested in that. So click-throughs can really help you from that standpoint. Within Constant Contact, we'll also tell you who clicked through, and you can drill down and actually create a list of the people that click through on a specific topic. And where might that be important? So let's pretend that I'm a wine store, and I have my Wine of the Month communication that goes out, and I'm going to start doing wine tastings. So I put a link in my communication, my Wine of the Month communication, and I say, we're now starting to do wine tastings. If you're interested in learning more about that, click here. Well, all the people that click through on that, I can now take that group and create a list of those people and say, okay, these are the people that are interested in wine tastings. So next time I have 3 spots left out of 60 for my wine tasting, and I want to send an alert out to the people that might be interested in that, I'll just send it to those people that click through about the wine tasting. That way I won't, in a sense, use up one of my communications to my entire audience who are more interested in the Wine of the Month, and I'll be able to target that message specifically to people that I know are interested in wine tasting, and I'll be able to fill those 3 slots. The other thing, there's another interesting case I wanted to tell you about, and that is about how can you use email marketing to really benefit you, in a challenging economy. And it brings me to the thought of this. There was a day spa that works with Constant Contact, and they noticed that on Wednesday of any given week, their appointments were all sort of filled up for the weekend. But by Thursday night, Friday morning, all of a sudden they'd had a bunch of cancellations. And so they had the people on staff, but they didn't have appointments filled. And what they started to do is send out an email communication every Friday morning at 10 o'clock. And it said something along the lines of, available slots this weekend. And what they did was they said, here I've got a pedicure at 10 a.m. on Saturday with Susie. I've got a massage on Sunday at 4 o'clock with Sam. And the first people to respond to this email message can have those spots at 20% off. And what happened was, first of all, they got a fantastic open rate because their clients they'd get it and they'd almost like they'd be looking forward to it, and they would fill those spots within minutes of sending that communication. But what they would also do is they would set themselves up for the next weekend because people would say, oh, you didn't have that one anymore? Okay, bum. And they'd say to the person, well, do you want me to schedule you one for next weekend or next week? And so they were able to actually increase the number of people that they had pre-reserved spots for. And the one caveat that person told me about it was, you have to be careful when you set people's expectations, because one week we didn't have any cancellations and we didn't send the email. And they started getting phone calls from everybody at 10:15. I'm not getting your emails anymore. I didn't get the email about all the open spots. And they realized, oops, when we've set their expectations, we better make sure we send something out. But just another tip on how you might use email marketing to drive some recurring business during these challenging economic times. So what's next? How can you continue to learn and develop the skills that you have? Well, at Constant Contact, we have a fabulous learning center, which is a place that you can go to. We have webinars there like this about how to get started with a trial and how to play around with it and how to create a great subject line. There's just tons and tons of different recorded, pre-recorded, and some live seminars. Every day we do a product tour for 2 o'clock Eastern time that allows you in 45 minutes to basically go from being a novice to an intermediate, and it's a great way to get up to speed. So, I encourage you to take advantage of these resources and other resources out there to really learn more and to leverage email marketing for your business, because there is no more important asset to your business than your existing customers. And it just always amazes me when I walk into a fabulous store and I look around and I'm like, oh my gosh, this place is great. And I go up and I ask them, can I join your mailing list? And they say, we don't have one. I've actually we have this little index card pack that I carry around with me, and I have a box of them in my trunk, and I'll go out and I'll pull one out, and it's like, create a list, because if you don't have that asset, you can't leverage it. And so I encourage all of you, if you don't have a customer list, to start building one today. Think about all your touch points, and that's the place to get started. And then once you have that list, you can tap into the enormous power of email marketing by just communicating out to that group. And if you communicate well, and you communicate great information, those people who want to look smart are going to forward on that communication to everyone that they know. So I encourage you to take advantage of that. If you want to, start doing email marketing today, you can go to Constant Contact. We have a free 60-day trial where you can, get in there and play around with a Constant Contact account and see all the cool different templates that you can use. But encourage you to get started today, because it is an enormously valuable asset for your business, and I hope you all take advantage of that. And with that, Rebecca, that's my spiel for today, and I wanted to thank HubSpot and Rebecca for providing me with this opportunity to share my insights with you, and I look forward to taking any questions that you might have.
That's good, because we have a lot of them.
Uh-oh.
A lot of the questions are just simple questions about best practices and things like that. But to start off, I want to start one about numbers. We have a big number-focused group, and people are wondering, what kind of click-through rate is average? What kind of open rate is average? What should people expect? I know you talked about trending data, but just as a starting point, how should people judge if they're doing well or not?
Sure, that's a great question. We get that question quite a bit, and unfortunately, I have to say it depends. Especially with the open rates. Now, open rates vary by the type of industry that you're in, and those folks that are in organizations, churches, religious organizations, nonprofits, and the like, well, they benefit because they get the best open rates typically, and they range. They're sort of in the low to mid 30s is a great open rate. The other thing to remember about open rates is it may not be the same 30-35% that are opening it every month. It could be a different group of people. Business-to-business type consultants, marketing agencies, accountants, they typically get in the mid-20s to 30% open rate. And business-to-consumer typically gets a little bit lower in the high teens to mid-20s, although there are things that you can do to increase that. I'm mentioning that, the Rothmans, where they put the sign-up form in front of the actual campaign, and by doing that, they actually drove open rates in the mid to upper 30s just because of the fact they'd set everybody's expectations and they were delivering great content. So, it's under your control, but that gives you a little bit of a ballpark of a range. Click-throughs, again, vary so much based on the call to action and the content. If you put all of the content into the email newsletter, very likely not a lot of people are going to click through. But if you just have that snapshot of the Wall Street Journal headlines with the link to read on, you're more likely to get people through to it because that link is going to show up higher, and more people are going to see the short, brief summary of it, and not just gather all the data from reading it. But things that are in the 10s to 20% click-through rates of the people that open it are fabulous click-through rates.
Awesome. Another question. A lot of your examples had to do with touching your customers. What about people who have not yet converted into customers, and maybe you're using email marketing as more of a lead nurturing means for that? Does the game change? Do you have different tips for that?
No, actually, that's a great point, because when you think about the cycle of building a relationship, right, it starts off with acquisition, and that's bringing an eyeball to your website or bringing someone who might be interested into your store, but they're not going to buy right away sometimes. In fact, it takes 6 to 7 interactions before you get somebody to buy from you. So it's really important that you give yourself the opportunity to collect that information from that person so that you can continue that dialogue and nurture them into a customer. And so the ways that you can do that are, one, if they're in your store, certainly asking them, engaging them and trying to figure out a little bit about what their interests are and say, oh, by the way, that's something that we cover in our newsletter. Could I ask you to join that? And putting things up on your website that, show people an archive of past content that you've sent out, and then giving them the sign-up tag there. It says, hey, join our mailing list, and we'll keep you informed about all of this great kind of information. Once you've made that connection, you can then nurture that connection into a first-time purchase. And, if it does take 6 or 7 interactions to get somebody to be a first-time customer, you can either wait for them to come back 6 or 7 times, or you can actually pull them back in. And that's one of the great tools that email marketing is fabulous for, because you can actually speed up the process of those 6 to 7 interactions and get someone to buy sooner. And then certainly once you've got them to be purchased from you, email is a great way to bring them back. But you're right on that email, if you get permission and you set expectations up front, is a great way to turn a prospect into a customer.
Absolutely. Question from Twitter we have here. These are just little. I have a bunch of best practice questions for you, so we'll run through a few of these. And one is it better to have a person's name or a brand name in the from line?
Well, that really depends on your business. If the brand that people are going to recognize is the name, so if it was if all the people on my list knew Eric Groves and would react to that and say, oh, I know that person, then I'd want to put Eric Groves at constantcontact.com. But if the list that it's going out to is a broad-based list that people relate to the brand more so than the individual, then you want to reiterate the brand in that email address, because the stuff up front is what people are going to focus in on versus the stuff after the @ sign. So, depending on whether you are the brand or the brand is the business, that's the thing that you want to put out there.
What about with making the email more personal? Should it say dear first name, last name? Should it just go with hi friend or something like that? Is there a best practice for how you should greet them?
I'm a big fan. Some people are big fans of actually putting the name in the subject line. I'm not a big fan of that. I think that sometimes that can come across a little too spam-like. But certainly personalizing it in the introductory paragraph where it says "Dear Eric" or "Eric," that's perfectly fine, and it actually kind of engages the audience because it's something that they're used to seeing in an email. And within systems like Constant Contact, you can set it up so that if you have that first name in your database, it'll put it in, and if not, it'll just leave that section blank. So, you can actually optimize both ways with that.
And you mentioned not putting images right at the top, but should you avoid images? Should you use images? What about HTML versus plain text?
Sure. I'm a big fan of using images because actually images allow the reader to relax a little bit in their eye. If you just put all text in, it's harder to read text on a computer than it is in a book. And what you want to use is a fair amount of white space between articles, and you can actually use images to break up the text. And, and images can bring your communications to life, too. I mean, a well-placed image, if you're doing that dive shop of, showing me the location and a picture of that dive spot is fabulous. It's going to capture people's attention. So you want to leverage images to support your content. Just don't overwhelm your reader by making it a huge image or putting it right up at the top because we know those images might be turned off. Plain text, it's important to look at both versions of your communication. When you actually build one within Constant Contact, you're creating it in the HTML wizard, and we're actually creating a text version behind it, so you don't have to create two, but you should certainly preview both and take a look at them and make sure that they look nice and are lined up and you created enough breaks in the text one so it doesn't just look like a big blob of text.
And when you're building your email list, what if you go to an event and you exchange cards with someone? Is that a person that it would make sense to put them directly into your email list? Should there be a touch point before that? What is the best practice for that?
So the best practice that we like to say at Constant Contact is that you take that person, and every time you send out a campaign within Constant Contact, we send you a confirmation version of it. And you should always have the forward to a friend link, in your communications anyway. But there's a little thing that allows you to forward to a friend. And what we suggest that people do is you come back from that event and you take the card and you go to your last campaign and you click forward to a friend in your campaign. And what it'll do is it'll open up a window and allow you to put their email address in and type a brief note to them and say, "Hey, Jack, it was great to meet you at last night's chamber event. I enjoyed our conversation. Wanted to share with you the monthly newsletter that I send out, and if it's something you might be interested in, there's a subscribe link right next to it, and you can join my mailing list." So that way you're sending a one-to-one communication, you're showing them the great content that you create, and you give them the action that they can take to get onto your list. And that's a much better approach than just dumping them into your list and adding them on. Unless you ask them at the event, would you like to receive my monthly newsletter? And then, I typically take the card, flip it over, and put, newsletter on the back of it so I know they've given me permission to send.
I think that's pretty good advice. A really interesting question just came in. So technology's changing, and more of us are using BlackBerries and iPhones, and we're using email on our BlackBerries and iPhones. Are the way we're doing email campaigns affecting that? And for example, if you're using images, will they not appear on the BlackBerry? Will it affect if they will open it or not, or receive the information or not? Have you seen a change in that?
What it does do, and you can see, if you send an email out of Constant Contact, I get them on my iPhone all the time, and all the images populate and it looks fabulous. It's just small, so you have to kind of zoom in on it. But what is great about these mobile devices is they actually force you towards the best practice of keeping your content short. Right? If you get your message across in a short amount of content, then your reader is much happier. And if you're reading it on a mobile device, there's nothing better than getting a campaign that's very short and sweet and gives you the information right there. And whether you're using an iPhone and you can see the HTML or a BlackBerry, some BlackBerries I believe you can see HTML, but the other ones are delivering in text. If it's short and sweet, you're going to get your message across regardless of how they're reading it. So, the one thing that it does do is just force you towards that best practice of, keeping your content very succinct.
And what about Twitter? A good question is Twitter a threat to email marketing? What do you think about that? I think that's really interesting.
I think that is interesting. I think there's a lot of different ways to communicate out to your audience, and you want to take advantage of every one of them, right? I mean, social networking is clearly something that's out there that a lot of people are taking advantage of. And why not tweet about the fact that you just sent your monthly newsletter out and put a Facebook post that you've created your email campaign with a link to it so people can go and read it. All of these things work together So I don't see one of them as, taking over the other. I think understanding how to leverage them all is really important so that you can maximize your reach to your audience and deliver your message however they want to receive it.
Excellent. And last question, my favorite one, and it was actually the first question I received throughout the entire presentation. And it is, would you consider email to be inbound or outbound marketing? I think this is great because I think with best practices, email is definitely an inbound marketing technique, and that's exactly why I had you on the entire program. But can you explain to people why email marketing, if done effectively, is not outbound marketing at all?
Well, that's an interesting question because it depends, I guess, if you're the sender or the receiver. But I think in the case of email, if you're doing it right, you're delivering value to the recipient. And if you think about it as an inbound a marketing tool, you're going to be putting yourself really in the right place because you're going to be sitting in your customer's seat and saying, what can I deliver to them that will be of interest to them? And it's really, something where you're pushing out to them a message that the recipient is going to be thrilled with. And so, to me, I think it is an inbound marketing medium because of the fact that if you're doing it right, you're thinking about it from that side of the equation. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
I think that was a great answer, and I agree. As someone that loves inbound marketing, I absolutely agree. You're still sharing content. It's valuable content, and if it's not just buy, and it's really let me educate you or give you some great resources, then it's absolutely inbound.
Yeah, it's not about you. It's about sharing what you know.
That's been an ongoing theme of this program. A lot of the different presenters have said that, so I think that's great.
Fantastic.
Well, thank you so much, Eric.
My pleasure.
It was wonderful. For those that might have more questions, again, feel free to go to the inboundmarketing.com forums, and we'll answer them there. Thank you to Constant Contact. Check them out, www.constantcontact.com.
And for those best practices, there is, surprise, we actually have an email newsletter that's a monthly hints and tips. So you can go to the archive and you can sign up for that if you want to get those best practices.
Awesome. Well, that's great. So go check that out, everybody. And your book, too, right, this summer?
Yep, that's coming out. It's the Constant Contact Guide to Email Marketing, and it's up on Amazon right now, and you can pre-order it.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you, On24, for helping with this entire series and donating your webcasting capabilities. So on the theme of email, you'll actually be getting an email from me later this day, actually, and it's going to be all about the certification so I can make sure everyone's up to date and knows how that certification exam will happen and how you can prepare. So last class later today in 2 hours, I can't believe it. We're done with Convert, and we're going on to Analyze. Of course, you're doing all this hard work. You want to make sure it's effective. So we're going to do Analyzing Inbound Marketing, Analyze 401 with Marshall Sponder. So definitely check that out, and I will talk to you guys later. Thank you, everybody.